Donald Trump has teamed up with RFK Jr. so together they can make America healthy again.
President Trump and I are going to stop the mass poisoning of American children. Together, we're going to make America healthy again.
But the question remains, will they actually make this a reality for the American people? There are two obstacles standing in the way. First, RFK must have an effective plan to fix the health crisis, one that actually has a direct effect on the health of the American people. Second, he must convince Trump to implement his plan. Now, this is no easy feat, as Trump not only drinks 12 Diet Cokes per day, but according to his own son, he consumes more McDonald's than anyone else. So convincing him to adopt a plan that encourages people to eat less processed food may not be the easiest task. But before we look at Robert's solution to these issues, let's have a look at how bad this crisis really is. In the year 1900, the odds of getting cancer were slim, with only about 6% of the population getting it at some point in their lifetime. Today, that number is over 40%. Cancer is now a threat to nearly half of America's population. Think about how insane that is. Heart disease is a similar story. In the year 1900, the first heart attack in the United States had not occurred. Heart disease, as we know it, was also not a thing. But now, 50% of Americans will experience some kind of cardiovascular event in their lifetime. In 1900, only 0.5% of people would get diabetes. Now that number is up to 40%. Americans who were overweight or obese, 10% in the year 1900, now at 70%.
120 years ago, when somebody was obese, they were sent to the circus. There were case reports written about them. Obesity was virtually unknown.
These numbers are only getting worse. Before we have a look at what Trump has to say about RFK's plan, let's see what RFK blames this health crisis on. In a recent interview with Fox, he said this.
Seed oils are one of the most unhealthy ingredients that we have in foods. And seed oils, the reason they're in the foods is because they're heavily subsidized. They're very, very cheap, but they are associated with all kinds of very, very serious illnesses, including body-wide inflammation,
right,
which affects all of our health. It's one of the worst things you can eat, and it's almost impossible to avoid. If you eat any processed food, you're going to be eating seed oil.
But it's not just the seed oils that he's concerned about. He's also very concerned with the chemicals that they're putting in our foods.
These ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago. Humans are not biologically adapted to eat them. Hundreds of these chemicals are now banned in Europe, but they are ubiquitous in American processed foods. We are literally poisoning our children systematically for profit.
But will Robert's plan even be effective? He thinks processed foods are to blame for all these illnesses. But every institute, including Harvard, the Cleveland Clinic, and even the World Cancer Research Fund International, blames red meat and says that people should limit their intake. Instead of looking at nutritional science, in which 90% of studies are funded by the big food companies themselves, let's use some good old-fashioned common sense to see what is to blame. Throughout all of these years, there was very little disease. All of a sudden, we introduce processed foods in the year 1905. And what happens? Many diseases suddenly start to essentially spawn out of nowhere, or the ones that were very rare become way more prevalent. Now, in the year 1970, red meat became villainized. People were told to limit their consumption. Because our health professionals are professionals, every disease rate dropped, right? Wrong. The rates of every disease still increased year on year. I want every person who actually believes that red meat is the cause of all these diseases to ask themselves one question. How can all of these modern diseases that did not exist until recently be caused by the one food that we've always eaten? And when there are ingredients like this in the food supply, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to work out what the true culprit is.
The ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tetrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings.
In fact, the food supply has gotten so bad, RFK says you should not be consuming fruits and vegetables due to the pesticides that they put on them.
My wife loves kale, and she had the impression that kale is actually good for you. If it's organic, it's very good for you, but most kale and strawberries, for example, grapes, are contaminated with pesticides, and particularly the Environmental Working Group has found what they call the dirty dozen, some of the worst pesticides on these products. So, I look at a strawberry and I think, oh, this is a healthy food. Right. But in most cases, unless it's organic, certified organic, you are getting something that's actually hurting you.
Now, before we look at the most important aspect of this entire operation, will Donald Trump actually implement Robert's plan? Let's first break down exactly what his plan in order to make America healthy again is. His plan consists of 3 major steps. The first being to put in place measures that prevent these diseases rather than waiting until people have them and trying to treat them.
Medicaid should be paying for gym memberships and for good food.
The second step is to change the guidelines because the American people, they listen to guidelines.
The American people, they comply with they hear and listen to clinical guidelines. When the Surgeon General told the American people to stop smoking, there was a huge drop in smoking. When the medical establishment told them to take COVID vaccines, they did it. When the medical establishment told them the food pyramid, they obeyed it. If they get good guidance, they've gotten perverse guidance. But if they get good guidance, they're going to do it. They don't have to be ordered to do it.
The third step, which is the most important of them all, is to remove corruption and get these chemicals out of our food.
Don't you want a president who's going to get the chemicals out of our food? And don't you want a president who's going to get the corruption out of Washington, D.C.? And don't we deserve a president of the United States that's going to make America healthy again?
Now this leaves us with just one issue to overcome. He must convince Trump that his beloved fast food is a major factor in America's health crisis. And he must get him on board to change his perspective for the country he loves. RFK did actually reveal Trump's plans.
He said, would I come and sit down with them? And he said to me during that meeting, he said, there are some things that we can agree on and some we disagree on, but the landscapes on which we agree are so much larger. He said, I want to end the wars. I want to protect the Constitution. And I want to end the chronic disease epidemic.
And even Trump himself said he would do it.
And rebuild our economy. We are also going to make America healthy again.
Now, will RFK and Trump's plan to fix America's health crisis actually work? Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction, and I don't think there will be many people that argue that getting these chemicals out of the food is not a good thing. But the bottom line is that it's up to us as individuals to make the correct health choices. The thing about living in a free, well, relatively free country like America is that no one can force you what to eat. It is up to the individual to make the decision. One thing I will say, however, is I do like the chances of it being effective more than I like the chances of the Democrat plan being effective. But I'm sure in order to tackle one of the greatest crises America faces, Kamala will have a clear and concise plan that absolutely everybody understands.
Person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam Vice President.
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
Earlier in the video, I mentioned how RFK now believes vegetables are toxic. But I actually think vegetables are much worse than he believes. So in this video, I'll break down why you need to avoid vegetables if you want to be healthy.